Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
Life boy ඉතරුම් ලොක්කා. දෙලනපලේ අඩුම මිල. රුපියල් 125කට පවුලටම ආරක්ෂාව.
On 1st at 9 tonight, this Tuesday the 15th of November 2022. Policy Foundation. Central Bank Governor praises the tough yet much needed decisions announced through Budget 2023.
This budget basically make the foundation after we regain the stability in the short term, then what next?
Criticism. Opposition calls for political liberalism via Budget 2023, while independent MPs led by Dallas faction urges government to reconsider selling Sri Lanka Telecom and insurance. Farming secured. UN Food and Agriculture Organization hands over 700 metric tons of urea to be distributed among smallholder farmers in Sri Lanka.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. Now, the debate on the second reading of the 2023 appropriation bill began in Parliament today. Parliamentarians of the Samagi Janabalawege, Dr. Harsha De Silva, urged President Ranil Wickremesinghe to include proposals on political liberalism, political freedom and social equity in Budget 2023. Meanwhile, independent parliamentarians Charita Herath urged members of the government to reconsider proposals announced in the 2023 budget to sell Sri Lanka Telecom and Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, which they say are profit-making ventures.
රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ නිවැරදි ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න බැරි ඔබතුමා ඔය වැටුන උගුලේ ඉඳලා බැරි බව මේ අයවැයෙන් ඔප්පු වෙනවා.
They told me it's a good UNP budget.
I told you that there are two sides to this budget. Of course I did. There was good reform. I said that. It has good reforms. But what I am criticizing now is the other side of the coin about social protection, about social justice. So you talked about a social market economy. In a social market economy, you know there is political liberalism and economic liberalism. You did well on the economic liberalism side. I applaud you on that. All the reforms are good. But what about the political liberalism? What about the political freedom? What about justice? What about social equity, sir? You look at the reality on the ground. How many people are poor? You know that. Poverty was only 11% when Gotabaya Rajapaksa took office. Today, according to the World Bank, it is 27%. According to the Peradeniya University, it is 40%. Poverty has increased by threefold, Honorable Sir. We have to acknowledge that. So all what I am saying is, I agree that reforms are necessary. I agree government revenue must increase. But I also urge you to consider the fact that a lot of people are in absolute poverty, that they cannot spend enough to get 2030 kilocalories a day, sir. You know that more than anyone else.
අපේ රටේ බදු ප්‍රතිපත්තිය වෙනස් කරන්න. බිලියන 1400ක් පූර්ණ ආදායම තියෙන රටක බිලියන 600ක් එකපාරට කපා හරපුවාම වැඩි ආදායම් තියෙන අයට බදු සහන දෙන්න රටට ආර්ථිකයට වෙන දේ ගැන හිතා ගන්න ඕන දරුවෙකුට පුළුවන්. නාස්තිකාර පාඩු ලබන රාජ්‍ය ව්‍යාපාර වලට යම්කිසි තීරණයක් ගන්න ඕන. හැබැයි මේ කියලා තියෙන්නේ මොකද්ද? ශ්‍රී ලංකා න්‍යායාලයින් එක ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කරන්න ඕන. ටෙලිකොම් ආයතනයේ අපේ රටේ පෞගිය කාර්තු එකකවත් පාඩු වෙලා නැහැ. එහෙම තියෙද්දි ඒක විකුණන එක වැරදි. රක්ෂණ සංස්ථාවේ කිසිම ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඇවිල්ලා තිබුණේ නැහැ. ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂයේ മന്ത്രിතුමන්ලට මම හිස නමලා කියන්නේ මේක ආපහු බලන්න. මේක සංශෝධනය කරන්න.
The Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe and the Treasury Secretary Mahinda Sirivardhana hailed the new budget as being forward-looking with the prospect of solving issues within the medium term whilst creating an environment for the country to thrive on after moving out of the crisis. Managing partner of BDO Sujiva Rajapaksa meanwhile commented that the budget has been prepared with an outlook of getting the country out of the crisis, as it does not provide concessions and relief to the people like in the previous years.
we see that there's something different here. You're looking forward. We're talking about 2045 and beyond. So what factors have you put together in formulating the policies forward?
Basically, since the eruption of crisis from the beginning of this year, there are several steps. We have to look at what are the short-term measures that would regain stability, overall macroeconomic stability. And the second step is to recover the economy to a more medium to long-term growth path. Those are two parts. The priority is to first, in the crisis situation, regain the stability. For that, they already started and implemented several measures. One of the key fundamental imbalances we had this economy for a long period is the fiscal imbalance. For that, the short-term stabilization measures included the earlier tax package that was introduced back in May, and then in the interim budget, some tax measures. And this is the basically for 2023 and beyond. This is why when you look at this budget, you don't see traditional conventional measures that you would normally see in a budget. But the short-term stabilization measures, government and the central bank have already implemented several short-term stabilization measures. As a result, this is why the situation now we see compared to 3-4 months ago, we have seen a significant improvement compared to where we were in terms of the availability of essentials, in terms of even inflation. Now we have seen it going weak, and now it is turning around. And obviously from the government point of view, the tax collections that last year had very lowest tax rate. As a result, government introduced several measures. Now we see tax revenues are also increasing. So that we have to look at this overall policy package and look at what are the priorities. And priorities were at the beginning to stabilize, and what we expect the next piece of that move for us to get the what we call financing assurances and get a relief from our creditors, complete our debt restructuring process. So because this is why you don't see a lot of those things talked about in this budget, because those have already been implemented and in the process of completing, and we are moving that process. So this budget basically make the foundation. After we regain the stability in the short term, then what next? Then the next steps are basically how we can enhance growth of this country, how we can find out new areas for growth, what are the bottlenecks in each area for us to go for a high growth path.
How would you introduce the features of this budget to address the reforms needed and the challenges we encounter in terms of public finances and fiscal management?
If you go through the history, maybe last 10-25 years, the budget deficit and the way it was financed is the root cause of many of the issues that we are facing in the macroeconomy. So it is imperative that you address that root cause. But unfortunately, the avenues that you have to address is very limited. Now the country is going through a very deep crisis. At the same time, from the fiscal policy side, the government revenue had been declined to one of the lowest in the world as well, about 8.3% of GDP. That's why in the very first stage of responding to this crisis, that there was new proposals implemented somewhere in May, particularly in terms of changing the revenue system in the country, particularly the taxation system. And then it was followed by the interim budget that also contained a number of measures to particularly increase the revenue and also the reduction of the expenditure as well, and to address other issues, for example, the state-owned reform. And this budget, what the government has done is to basically prepare a path which could consolidate the measures that we have already implemented, and also to strengthen the fiscal situation in the country while creating an environment where the economic activities would be taking place. And it is not the kind of, overnight or very short-term effort. You have to have some medium to long-term view on that. So the Honorable President himself has taken that view and presented this budget to basically consolidate the fiscal sector issues, and at the same time to try and implement reforms that would enable the economic activities to take place, and not immediately in this year or maybe next year, in the medium term. So the idea is to basically create that environment right now, so that once we are coming out of this crisis, so we will have an environment where the economic activities would be facilitated.
What's your overall analysis of the tax policy undertaken by the government through this budget?
It's in a way bitter kind of experience when you increase income tax or pay or whatever, VAT and all that. But needless to say, as Governor said, GDP tax have been around 8%, I believe, a couple of years ago. But we should have been at least 15%. So that is why government has taken bold kind of decisions to increase all these tax thresholds. It's a question of how are you going to increase government revenue? How are you going to finance large number of areas? Well, either you print money or you collect revenue through by way of taxes. So that's how we have to do it. But I'm a firm believer of paying tax. But we need to make sure those tax, every cent is basically utilized for a worthy cause. There are a fairly large number of proposals discussing about the digitization of processes in this most of the places. And also there's one proposal that Inland Revenue, Customs and Excise Department, three will have to get together. I think all this time we didn't have that. This budget proposal encourages, or rather in a way discourages, to use cash, currency. There are no salary increases and no any other concessions given here. But we all citizens of this country need to understand it will be very hard for any government to give so much of concessions.
Now, leaders of the group of 20 major economies are expected to express concern about the deteriorating debt situation faced by some vulnerable middle-income countries and call on all official and private creditors to respond swiftly to requests for debt treatment. A draft of the G20 leaders' declaration seen by Reuters include far stronger language about debt issues and acknowledges that the problems extend far beyond just the poorest nations. The draft declaration acknowledges that the first time the severity of the debt problems facing middle-income countries in what experts said was a clear reference to Sri Lanka, which reached a staff-level agreement with the IMF in early September but needs to get financing assurances from multiple creditors including China and Japan to secure disbursements. The debt stressed the importance of all official and private creditors participating in debt relief and shouldering a fair burden. However, it did not mention China, which has been criticized by many Western countries and international financial institutions for delaying debt restructuring efforts. Now, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization handed over 750 metric tons of urea to be provided to farmers who cultivated in small lands. Speaking at an event to hand over the stocks of urea to the Ministry of Agriculture, country representative of FAO, Vimlendran Sharan, said Jaffna will donate to $4 billion for the procurement of fertilizer, while more funding is expected to be given through USAID and the EU. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations handed over 780 metric tons of urea procured through the UN Central Emergency Relief Fund to the Ministry of Agriculture today. According to the FAO, 15,619 farmers cultivating paddy on land holdings of half an acre or less will receive 50 kilograms of urea each in 4 of the more poverty-stricken districts of Jaffna, Mullaitivu, Kilinochchi and Badulla. Urea will be provided to the farmers free of cost, and distribution is to commence this week with the support of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Department of Agrarian Development.
This is the start of a process and perhaps a very small part of what this country needs. The majority of the inputs which is required will be coming through the government itself. But as the international community, we thought it was our duty to come together and provide whatever we could through donor funding to enable the smallholder farmers, the vulnerable farmers, get access to inputs, especially fertilizers, which was denied to them for the last 2 years due to various reasons. So while the funding from SURF will take care of farmers having land holdings up to half an acre in the 4 districts, we have more funding coming in from USAID, under which we are reaching out to 8 districts and 186,000 farmers. We have more funding coming from EU, under which we are reaching out to another 40,000 farmers. And I am also happy to let all of you know that the government of Japan also now is coming forth with another $4 million aid, which will be going towards procuring more fertilizer to help smallholder farmers.
It is very important to focus on production. We do not want to transfer Sri Lanka into a humanitarian recipient. The UN is eager about how we support Sri Lankans really overcome this crisis to become the producers rather than only the receiving of the humanitarian assistance. And I think with the support of today and hopefully with the support, more support from funding from other countries, we will be able to reach, and that's our plan, to reach 3.4 million people of those mostly in need, including, of course, the farmers and fisheries, pregnant and lactating mother, and the most vulnerable population.
Now, meanwhile, Minister Mahinda Amravera says more urea shipments are expected to be on the island by the 27th of November and the 12th and 15th of December. He said this during the visit to the Colombo port to inspect a 22,000 metric ton shipment of urea that arrived at the Colombo port on Sunday. This is the second shipment under the financial allocation of $105 million by the World Bank to buy urea fertilizer needed for paddy and maize crop cultivation this Maha season. Upon inspection, the minister instructed Lanka Fertilizer Company and Commercial Fertilizer Company to start unloading the consignment from today to expedite the distribution process. Stay with us for more news after this short commercial break.
Big 3.
Welcome back. The Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment announces that a number of employment opportunities related to the construction field in Saudi Arabia will be received by Sri Lankans in the near future. Issuing a statement, the SLBFE further stated that the Minister of Labour and Foreign Employment, Manusha Nanaikar, is currently on an official visit to Saudi Arabia to discuss employment opportunities for Sri Lankan professionals in those construction projects. Meanwhile, the Saudi Arabian Embassy of Sri Lanka informed the general public that it is mandatory to be registered with the Engineering Council of Saudi Arabia before flying for employment in engineering and technology fields at construction sites in the country. Accordingly, all those with relevant qualified individuals in the field of engineering and technology who wish to apply for employment opportunities are informed to register by visiting the website www.saudieng.sa. Now, former MP Hirunika Premachandra and 14 others were granted bail by the Colombo Chief Magistrates Court today. They were arrested yesterday in relation to participating in a demonstration near the President's house and interfering in police duties. Accordingly, the Colombo Chief Magistrate Nandan Amarasinghe ordered each suspect, including Hirunika Premachandra, to be released on a cash bail of Rs 10,000 and a surety bail of 5 million rupees each. The case was then ordered to be postponed until the 13th of February 2023. Now, Colombo shares closed lower for a second straight session today, dragged by industrial companies. At the close of trade, the all-share price index fell 0.86% to 8,291.15. weighed by losses in industrial stocks. Also on the ASPI, conglomerates Expo Lanka Holdings PLC and Richard Pieris and Company PLC were the top drags, falling 3.7% and 13.9% respectively. Trading volume rose to 62 million shares from about 43.5 million in the previous session. Market turnover was 1.58 billion Sri Lankan rupees or $4.35 billion compared with the 941.1 million rupees in the previous session. Foreign investors were net buyers in the equity market, purchasing stocks worth 156.6 million rupees, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading shares worth 1.57 billion rupees. Now let's take a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. The UN Human Rights Office says both Russia and Ukraine have tortured prisoners of war during the nearly 9-month conflict, citing examples including the use of electric shocks and forced nudity. The UN's Ukraine-based monitoring team based its findings on interviews with more than 100 prisoners of the war of each side of the conflict since April.
The interviews with Ukrainian prisoners of war were conducted after their release since Russia did not grant access to detention sites. Matilda Bogner, head of the monitoring mission, told a Geneva press briefing that the vast majority of Ukrainian prisoners they interviewed held by Russian forces reported torture and ill treatment. She gave examples of dog attacks, mock executions, electric shocks with tasers, and military phones and sexual violence. Russia denies torture or other forms of maltreatment of prisoners of war. On the Ukrainian side, Bogner reported credible allegations of summary executions of Russian prisoners, noting that no progress has yet been seen in Ukrainian authorities' investigations into these cases. Other Russian prisoners reported poor and humiliating conditions of transport and of being packed into trucks or vans naked with their hands tied behind their backs. The UN team said it had also documented cases of so-called welcome beatings at a penal colony. Ukraine, however, has previously said it checks all information regarding the treatment of prisoners of war and will investigate any violations and take appropriate legal action.
Now, crowds of people in the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou crashed through COVID barriers and marched down streets in chaotic scenes, according to videos posted online in a show of public resentment over the coronavirus curbs. Among the latest outbreaks in China's largest city is the largest new daily infections of COVID-19, topping 5,000 for the first time and fueling speculation that localized lockdowns could widen. Videos widely shared on Twitter showed noisy scenes in Guangzhou's Haishu district of people charging down streets and remonstrating with white hazmat suit-clad workers. Twitter is blocked in China and several hashtags related to the topic of riots in the area were crushed from China's Twitter, like Weibo on Tuesday morning. And that concludes today's edition of First at 9. Join us again tomorrow at the same time for the very latest news. Until then, join us on our website www.AdaDerana.lk. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.